The check landed in the middle of the table like something dropped from a great height, and I watched my own hand reach for the little leather folder before my brain had even finished reading the number. $7,240. I read it again. The decimal point didn't move. The string of digits just sat there under the dim restaurant light, patient and obscene, while 22 people I had met 2 hours earlier kept right on laughing like nothing in the world had changed. I was at the end of the table, not the head. They'd put me there, near the swinging kitchen door, where the busboys kept brushing past my chair. I remember the smell of seared butter and the cold draft every time those doors opened. I remember the way my pearl earring kept catching on the collar of my good blouse, the navy one I'd ironed that morning because my son had said, "Wear something nice, Mom. It's a special night." A special night. That was the phrase. 3 days earlier, he'd called and told me his wife's father was retiring after 31 years at the county engineering office, and the family wanted to do a small dinner. Just close people, real low-key. And would I come because his wife's mother had been asking about me? I'd been touched. God help me, I'd been touched that anyone wanted me there. I'd said yes before he finished the sentence. Then I walked into that steakhouse, and the hostess led me past table after table, until we reached a private room in the back, with a banner that said congratulations and a balloon arch, and 22 strangers in cocktail dresses and sport coats, and I stood there in my ironed navy blouse, holding a card with a $20 bill inside it, feeling the floor tilt. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back, because none of this started in that restaurant. It started a long time before, the way these things always do. My husband passed 6 years ago. Heart attack in the driveway on a Sunday morning, the newspaper still rolled up in his hand. We'd been married 41 years. He worked at the bottling plant his whole life, second shift, came home smelling like cardboard and machine oil, and he loved that boy of ours like the sun rose and set on him. Maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe we both loved him too much and taught him the wrong lesson without ever meaning to. After my husband died, I had the house, paid off, and his small pension, and my Social Security, which came to about $1,900 a month. I want to be honest about the numbers because numbers matter in a story like this, and because I've heard people say things that aren't true, that an old woman couldn't possibly live on that. You can. You live careful. You watch the thermostat in January, and you buy the store brand coffee, and you don't replace the car until it leaves you stranded. But you can live, and I had a little put away besides, a savings account I'd been feeding for years, dollar by dollar, the way you fill a jar. And every time my son needed something, I dipped into that jar. When he and his wife bought their house, I gave them $11,000 toward the down payment. I told myself it was a gift. That's what mothers do. When his truck transmission went, I covered the $2,200. When she wanted the kitchen redone, I didn't pay for the whole thing, but I wrote a check for $4,000 toward the cabinets and never said a word about it again. Christmases, birthdays, the time the water heater burst. I was the soft place they landed every single time, and I was glad to be it, because being needed felt like being loved, and after my husband died, I was starving for both. I tell you all this so you understand the woman who walked into that restaurant. I wasn't a fool. I was a widow who had confused giving with being wanted, and there's a difference between those two things that takes some people a whole lifetime to learn. It took me until I was 68, sitting next to a swinging kitchen door, holding a bill for $7,000. So there I was. The dinner went on for 2 hours, and I barely existed in it. My daughter-in-law's relatives ordered like they'd never see food again. The $38 ribeyes, the lobster tail, 3 bottles of wine I couldn't have pronounced, a tower of seafood on ice that 2 of the younger ones picked at and abandoned, appetizers nobody finished, desserts ordered for the table and eaten by 4 people. I had the chicken piccata and a glass of water with lemon, because I'd looked at the menu and felt my stomach drop, and I'd assumed, the way you assumes the sky is up, that everyone was paying for themselves. Nobody talked to me except my daughter-in-law's mother, who leaned over once, somewhere around the 2nd bottle of wine, and said, "We're so glad you could be part of this. Travis says you just love to spoil everyone." And she smiled at me, this warm, wide, terrible smile, and I felt the trap close, but I didn't understand yet what it was. My son sat across from me the whole night with his eyes on his phone. He laughed at the right times. He clinked glasses. He never once looked at me long enough to read my face, which is a thing a person does on purpose. I've learned, when they already know what they're about to ask you for. Then the plates were cleared, and the room got loud and bright, and the server, a young man with a careful, polished way about him, set the leather folder down, and he set it down in front of me. I looked up at my son. I waited for him to wave it over to himself, to laugh and say, "No, no, give that here." He didn't. He finally looked at me then, the first real look all night, and his face had nothing in it. No apology, no shame. Just a kind of practiced ease, like he'd rehearsed it in the car on the way over. "You've got this one, Mom," he said. "We already told everybody. We're gonna head out and grab the cars. It's freezing. Meet you out front." And he stood up. They all stood up. 22 chairs scraping back at once, purses lifted onto shoulders, somebody saying, "Such a lovely evening," my daughter-in-law dropping a kiss on her mother's cheek, all of them moving toward the door in a slow, warm tide of bodies, and not one of them looked back at me. Not one of them said thank you. They left me there the way you leave a coat at coat check, certain it'll still be hanging there when you're ready for it. I sat there with that folder in front of me, and I felt the old machinery start to turn. I actually picked up the pen. My hand reached for it on its own, the way it had reached for the folder, because that was the program I'd been running for 68 years. Mother fixes it. Mother smooths it over. Mother pays so there won't be a scene, so nobody's embarrassed, so the piece holds. I had the pen in my fingers, and I was looking at the line where you write the tip, and I was already doing the math on whether my savings would cover it. And then I heard my husband. Not really. I want to be clear, I'm not a woman who hears voices. But I heard him the way you hear someone who's been gone a long time, the words rising up out of memory, so clear they might as well have been spoken. The last real conversation we had, a week before the driveway, he'd taken my hand at the kitchen table, and he'd said, "Promise me you'll take care of yourself when I'm gone. You give and you give, and one of these days there's gonna be nobody left to give to but you." I'd laughed it off. I'd told him to stop talking like that. I put the pen down. I sat very still for a moment, and the strangest thing happened. The fear went out of me. All those years I'd paid out of fear. Fear of the scene. Fear of being the difficult one. Fear that if I said no, the love would dry up and blow away. And sitting there alone at that wreckage of a table, I realized the love had already dried up. There was nothing left to protect. They'd already shown me exactly what I was to them. I had nothing to lose by being honest for the first time in my life. I raised my hand, and I caught the server's eye, and he came over with that careful expression, half expecting trouble, the way young men in restaurants learn to expect it. "I'm sorry to ask this," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt, "but I'm going to need you to do something for me. I'd like a separate check, please. For my chicken piccata and my water. That's all I had. Everything else on this bill belongs to the party that just walked out the door." He blinked at me. "Ma'am," the gentleman said. I know what the gentleman said. I folded my hands on the white tablecloth. "The gentleman is my son, and I love him. But I did not order any of this. I was not told I'd be paying for any of this, and I'm not going to. My meal was $31. I'll pay that and a fair tip for you because none of this is your fault and you've been kind. The rest of it is between this restaurant and the 22 people who ate it." I watched him do the arithmetic of his own night, the manager he'd have to call, the awkwardness of it, and I felt bad for him, I truly did. But I held still. I'd spent my whole life absorbing other people's discomfort so they wouldn't have to feel it. Just once, I let it sit where it belonged. He went and got the manager. A tired-looking woman came over, and I told her the same thing, calm and plain, no tears, no shaking. And I gave her my son's full name and my daughter-in-law's father's name, the guest of honor, and I told her they'd just gone out to the parking lot and she'd likely catch them before they pulled away. I paid my $31, and I left 12 on top for the young man, and I picked up my purse, and I walked out through that beautiful restaurant with my chin level, past every table, and I pushed open the door into the cold. They were all still out there. That's the thing. They hadn't gotten in their cars yet. They were standing around in the valet lane in a knot, laughing, waiting for me to come out smiling with the receipt the way I always did. And the manager was already coming out behind me, walking fast, calling my son's name. I didn't stop to watch. I'd parked my own car, my 15-year-old sedan, 3 blocks down because the valet was $8, and I wasn't going to pay $8. So I walked, and behind me I could hear it all start, the voices rising, my son's voice going high and sharp. "What do you mean she left? What do you mean the bill?" And my daughter-in-law's mother saying, "I don't understand," I thought. And the whole warm tide of them turning cold and confused and ugly right there in the parking lot, and I just kept walking toward my little car under the streetlight, and I'll tell you something. I felt taller than I'd felt in years. My phone started ringing before I got home. I didn't answer it. It rang the whole drive. 11 times I counted at the red lights, my son's name lighting up the dash over and over. I let it ring. I got home and I made myself a cup of the cheap coffee and I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my husband had held my hand and made me promise, and I drank it slow while the phone buzzed itself across the counter. When the texts started, I read those. The first ones were panic. Mom, pick up. Mom, what happened? Mom, they're saying we owe 7 grand. Then they curdled. I can't believe you'd embarrass me like this in front of her whole family. Do you have any idea what you've done? After everything we do for you. That one stopped me. That one made me laugh out loud, alone in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night. After everything they do for me. I sat there and I made a list on the back of an envelope of everything I'd done for them, dollar by dollar, going back 6 years, and when I added it up, it came to something north of $40,000. And that wasn't even counting the things you can't put a number on. The babysitting, the soup when they had the flu, the 41st birthday party I threw for him with the cake I made myself. I texted him back one time that night. I wrote, I love you. I did not order that dinner and I'm not going to pay for it. We can talk when you're ready to talk like family instead of like a collection agency. Then I turned the phone face down and I went to bed, and the strangest thing of all, I slept. Deep and dreamless, the first real sleep I'd had in months. The fallout came in waves over the next few weeks, and I won't pretend it didn't hurt, because it did. He didn't call for 9 days. When he finally did, it wasn't to apologize, it was to negotiate, and that told me everything. He said the restaurant had made them pay before they left, that they'd had to split it across 4 credit cards in the parking lot like a bunch of college kids. That his wife's family thought he was trash now. That her father, the man of the hour, had pulled him aside and asked what kind of man lets his elderly mother foot the bill for a party she wasn't even part of planning. The irony of that nearly knocked me over. The whole scheme had blown back on him, and now he was furious at me for not absorbing it the way I always had. You humiliated me, he kept saying. In front of everyone. No, I told him, and I was so calm it surprised even me. I declined to pay for a dinner I didn't order. You humiliated yourself when you volunteered my savings account to a room full of strangers without asking me. Those are 2 different things, and you're old enough to know the difference. He hung up on me. His wife sent a long message a few days after that, and I'll give her this. It was better written than his texts, but it was the same thing dressed up nicer. How disappointed she was. How she'd always thought of me as a second mother. How a real family supports each other, and money shouldn't come between people. I read it twice. Then I wrote back 4 sentences. I agree, money should never come between people. That's exactly why you should never have planned to spend mine without asking. I would have been honored to come to that dinner as a guest. I was brought there as a wallet. I noticed the difference, and I won't forget it. She didn't answer. I didn't expect her to. And here's where the story would usually end, with the old woman alone and vindicated and lonely. But it didn't go that way, and that's the part I most want to tell you, because nobody warned me it could go this way. A woman from the dinner reached out to me. My daughter-in-law's aunt, a widow herself, a little younger than me, sharp-eyed and direct. She'd seen the whole thing. She found my number through the family and she called me one afternoon, and the first thing she said was, Honey, I have been wanting to walk out of a room like that my entire life, and I watched you do it, and I have not stopped thinking about it. Her name was Yvonne, and we got to talking, and 1 cup of coffee turned into a standing Thursday lunch, and she's the one who brought me to the community center. There's a group that meets there, mostly women, mostly widowed or divorced, mostly over 60, and they call themselves something silly that I won't repeat, but the gist of it is, they're women who spent their whole lives being useful to everyone but themselves, and they're learning, late and stubborn, how to stop. The first time I went, I didn't say a word. I just sat in the back and listened to a 74-year-old retired schoolteacher describe finally telling her grown daughter that no, she would not be cashing out her retirement to fund a wedding she hadn't been consulted about. And the whole room nodded like a congregation. And something in my chest that had been clenched for years let go. I started keeping my money. That sounds small, but it wasn't. I stopped that automatic reach into the jar. When my son finally came around again, months later, and it started, the hints, the things are tight right now, though we hate to ask, but I said the sentence I'd practiced in the bathroom mirror until I could say it without my voice shaking. I said, I love you, and the answer is no, And you don't need to give me a reason for asking, but I don't need to give you one for declining. He didn't like it. But here's what I learned. The thing I wish somebody had told me at 40. A person who only loves you when you're paying never loved you at all, and a person who loves you for real can survive the word no. My son, it turned out, was a little of both, and the no forced the real part to either show itself or admit it was never there. It took him the better part of a year, and a marriage that hit a hard patch when the money I used to backfill stopped flowing, and a few more humiliations that I had nothing to do with this time. But somewhere in there he started calling just to talk. No ask attached. Short calls, awkward but real. He brought me a plant for my birthday instead of asking what I could give him. It's not the relationship I dreamed of when he was small and slept with his hand wrapped around my finger. But it's honest, finally, and honest is worth more than I ever knew. The savings account I almost emptied that night in the restaurant is the reason I have a new roof this year, and a little trip planned with Yvonne to see the ocean, which I haven't done since my husband was alive. I think about that a lot. I almost gave away the ocean to pay for lobster tails eaten by people who never learned my name. I'm 69 now. I sat down last week and did something I'd never done. I wrote my own self a letter. The way that school teacher, in the group, suggested. A letter to the woman I used to be, the one with the pen in her hand at that table, about to sign away everything to keep a peace that was already gone. I told her it wasn't her job to be the soft place where everyone landed. I told her that giving until you're empty isn't love. It's fear wearing love's coat. I told her the kindest thing she ever did for her son was the night she finally let him feel the weight of his own choices. Because a child who is never allowed to face a consequence never grows all the way up, and I'd robbed him of that for years by always swooping in. And I told her the thing I most needed to hear, the thing I'll leave you with. Because if there's one woman out there listening who's got her own pen in her hand right now, hovering over her own terrible bill, I want her to hear it too. You do not owe anyone your last dollar. You do not owe anyone your dignity. You do not owe anyone the small, quiet, daily disappearance of yourself. Not your children, not your family, not the people who smile at you across a table and call you generous while they reach into your purse. You are allowed to keep something for yourself. You are allowed, after a whole life of giving, to finally be the one you give to. I learned it at 68, alone in a parking lot, walking to a 15-year-old car under a cold streetlight, and I have never once been sorry. That walk was the first free step I'd taken in 40 years, and every step since has been mine.